Tom Hanks, a rare icon of Hollywood where dazzling lights often devour fragile souls, has etched his name deep into humanity's memory with the innocent yet unyielding Forrest Gump, the lonely man adrift on a deserted island in Castaway, and the courageous lawyer of Philadelphia who dared to confront the ruthless cruelty of fate. For decades, he has been the very embodiment of kindness, the warm heartbeat within a film capital all too familiar with coldness and pretense. Yet behind that immortal glory, behind the smile that has soothed millions of hearts, lie wounds that will never fully heal, long, cold nights that choke the breath, moments when darkness engulfs and clings to his soul as if determined to tear it apart piece by piece. Now at 68, the man once thought to be invincible is still battling through the darkest chapters of his life, where pain refuses to let go and haunting memories close in with ruthless illness striking both him and his life partner. Do not look away, for what he is enduring now may well be the most profound chapter of his entire life. And if his roles have ever touched your heart, leave a like as a gesture of tribute to the kindest man in Hollywood. Some hearts are born with cracks too wide for childhood to fill, and Tom Hanks, born on July 9, 1956, in the modest town of Concord, California, entered the world without the cushion of a warm, steady home. His father, Amos, worked as a wandering cook, earning just enough to get by, while his mother, Janet, struggled to find her own footing. Money was never abundant, and stability was rarer still. At the age of 4 in 1960, the fragile foundation of his young life collapsed when his parents' marriage dissolved, not in fiery arguments, but in a cold, merciless silence that left him gasping for certainty. That separation carved the family in two. Tom and two siblings went with their father, drifting from job to job, kitchen to kitchen, in a nomadic rhythm of survival, while his youngest brother stayed with their mother. This wasn't just a divorce, it was a dismantling of the only world he knew. By the time he turned 10, Tom had lived in 10 different houses, most of them cramped rentals with peeling paint and the faint smell of someone else's life lingering in the corners. Beds were borrowed, walls were unfamiliar, and meals were often simple and sparse, the kind that fed the body but left the heart still hungry. Every move meant another new school, another lunch alone, another reminder that he was always the outsider. He wore the same clothes until they frayed, learned to be grateful for whatever space he was given, and became skilled at staying out of the way. "I was a geek, an outsider," he would later say, though those words had a deeper truth. He had learned early that asking for love or stability only led to disappointment. His home was not a place, it was a suitcase. And yet, in the midst of this quiet poverty of both money and certainty, there was one place he felt seen, the stage. In dusty school auditoriums under buzzing lights, he could slip into another life, a life where people listened, where applause broke the silence that haunted him. That applause was not just sound, it was oxygen. Still, each performance ended the same way. The curtain fell, the lights dimmed, and he went home to another strange room, another temporary bed. Looking back decades later, Tom described his childhood in one word: lonely. From a man who would become the face of love, decency, and connection on screen, that word is almost unbearable. And yet, it was in those empty nights and unsettled days that he made a silent vow. If he ever found his voice, he would use it to make others feel seen, to shield them from the same ache of invisibility that had shaped his own life. That vow, forged in the poverty of stability and the hunger for belonging, would guide him through every role, every act of kindness, and every fight to rise above the shadows that never truly let go. But adulthood didn't arrive as a rescue. It came as another kind of loneliness. At 21, Tom Hanks in 1977 stepped into a world carrying nothing but a battered suitcase, an old typewriter, and the fragile hope that he could survive in a city that didn't care if he disappeared. After dropping out of Sacramento State University, he boarded a bus to New York, a place that looked magical in postcard but felt brutally indifferent up close. The rent was high, the rooms were small, and the nights were colder than he had ever imagined. He shared cramped apartments with near strangers, sometimes sleeping on floors, sometimes on couches, often wondering if this was how dreams began or how they ended. His pockets were almost always empty. Meals were whatever he could scrape together from change, and casting calls were his only lifeline, yet most ended in silence. In interviews years later, Tom would recall walking out of auditions convinced that the casting directors didn't see a leading man, just a skinny kid with a funny voice and no edge. In an industry that rewarded sharpness and swagger, his kindness was almost a liability. "I learned early on that the room didn't need me," he once said quietly, "and that's a hard thing to carry home at night." But the rejection didn't break him. It carved him. He took every opportunity, no matter how small or humiliating. Bit parts in off-Broadway plays, low-budget horror films like 1980's He Knows You're Alone that paid just enough for rent, and stagehand work at the Great Lakes Theater Festival in Cleveland in the late 70s, where he not only acted but built sets, hung lights, and swept the stage. "Those years taught me everything," he later reflected. "You show up, you wake, and you keep going even if no one notices." By 1980, at just 24, his persistence led to a breakthrough, if you could call it that, when he landed a role in the quirky sitcom Bosom Buddies, dressing in women's clothes just to get his character an apartment. It was absurd, short-lived, but for Tom it was a crack in the wall he'd been pounding for years. Yet even then, the fear never left. Every time a job ended, he feared the dream would vanish and he'd be back on the bus, suitcase in hand. In hindsight, Tom has admitted that those early years were not about chasing success, but about survival. "I didn't have a plan B," he told an interviewer decades later. "I just knew I couldn't go back to feeling invisible." That invisible boy from the 10 different childhood homes was still inside him, pushing him to stay on stage a little longer, to believe the applause might mean he was worth keeping around this time. Looking back now, the path from those sleepless nights in New York to the bright lights of Hollywood seems like destiny, but in the moment, it was a daily act of endurance, a quiet battle fought in worn-out shoes with scripts in one pocket and bus fare in the other. And that battle fought in the shadows would shape the man the world would one day call the kindest soul in Hollywood. The world watched Tom Hanks move from light-hearted comedy to landmark drama, and each step seemed effortless to those of us in the seats. From the tender wonder of Big to the searing honesty of Philadelphia, from the timeless soul of Forrest Gump to the quiet storm of Castaway. What the spotlight could not show was a prize beneath the praise, because with every role that lifted him higher, something deeper was asked of his body, his mind, and his heart. For Philadelphia, he shed nearly 35 pounds and entered a character living under stigma, and the change did not end with the costume. The weight seemed to come off a spirit, too, leaving a chill that lingered long after the cameras stopped rolling. Forrest Gump brought a wave of love. Yet behind that warmth, he made a daring choice to trade a fixed $7 million salary for a share of the film's gross, a brave decision that earned him over $70 million, but also turned applause into pressure and tomorrow into a test he felt bound to pass. In Saving Private Ryan, the trauma of war had to be carried with restraint and respect, and the days ended with a tiredness that felt moral more than physical, the kind that teaches humility rather than pride. In Castaway, production paused for months so his body could mirror a man stripped down to solitude, and the silence carved a loneliness that took time to lift, because isolation on screen can leave echoes off screen. Audiences sought triumphs while he lived the toll, and fame did not grant rest so much as demand more. With schedules, publicity, and the expectation to remain America's gentle everyman turning quiet rooms heavier than crowded premieres. At times he described the peak as feeling like standing inside a beautiful room whose door seemed softly locked, an image that explained why success can comfort and confine at the same time. There were nights when he wondered who he was away from a camera, when the kind eyes people loved were simply tired. And yet he kept faith with the craft, reading, preparing, and choosing to honor real people and real feelings above noise and numbers. In reflective moments, he admitted that only a few of his many films felt complete in his own measure, a humbling standard that hurt a little and helped a lot, because it kept the work pointed towards service rather than vanity. That is why his summit never became a place to rest, but a narrow line to walk with discipline and care, turning pressure into purpose and recognition into responsibility, so that someone leaving the theater might feel a little less alone. Even at the height of Hollywood, with trophies in his hands and ovations ringing in his ears, Tom Hanks still carried a quiet ache from long ago that no accolade could mend. Years before the world called him a beloved figure, he had been a frightened young man reaching for safety in the arms of a woman he hoped could fill the emptiness left by a broken childhood. His first marriage to Samantha Lewis was not born of readiness, but of loneliness, and haunted by the fracture of his own family, he clung to the belief that love and marriage might spare him from repeating the pattern he feared. Yet youth and desperation proved a fragile foundation. At just 21, he became a husband and soon a father, knowing in his own heart that he was unprepared for the pressure, responsibility, and sorrow waiting ahead. He would later reflect that at such a tender age, he mistook fear for readiness and loneliness for love, a heartbreaking confusion that planted the seeds of years of quiet regret. As work demanded more of him, the fault lines widened, and Samantha, gentle yet burdened, slipped behind a life moving too quickly. The love that once promised to anchor him became another weight he could no longer carry, and the quiet divorce of 1987 shattered him because it felt not only like an ending but also the beginning of a guilt that would follow for years. He had sworn the cycle of a fractured home would stop with him, and yet he watched Colin and Elizabeth live between two households as he once had, a bitter irony for an actor celebrated as a steadfast father figure who now wondered in private whether he had failed his own children. There were days when applause on set returned as a hollow echo, when after filming scenes about family he stepped into a trailer where no one waited, and he later admitted that the hardest sound was the hush of a hotel room when he knew his children were hurting far away. The nights were heavy, and sometimes he sat in the car rather than walk into an empty house, because success could not drown the guilt, and the quiet at home cut deeper than any review. While the public saw a man at full strength, he saw a parent who had missed bedtime stories and school plays and the chance to say he was proud in the moment, and he feared the silence of his children more than any criticism. There were evenings when the sun barely met his eyes, and every declaration of love on screen felt unsafe to trust off screen. The hardest truth of all was that he never stopped caring for Samantha, not with the ardor of first love, but with a steadfast sorrow. And when illness later struck in the form of bone cancer, she was met with his full help. He covered treatment, visited often, sat by her bed, and held a hand while memories of two young dreamers returned. Yet he could only watch the decline and could not repair what had once broken between them, no longer a husband but still the boy who had promised to protect her. He would later confide that some failures live quietly in the heart and that the only answer is to keep showing up with kindness, even when kindness cannot change the ending. This was not fodder for headlines, but the story of a man who tried, faltered, and continued to shoulder the cost of his choices. Because while cameras recorded the rise of a legend, behind them stood a father asking whether love by itself could ever be enough. Some wounds do not seek attention, yet they do not easily close. Just when Tom Hanks believed a measure of peace had finally found him, life tested him again, not as an actor framed by lenses, but as a partner, a husband, and a man who would be asked to stand steady in the dark. His second marriage to actress Rita Wilson had been a steady light against the odds of Hollywood, a love that grew not with noise but with patience, because they met at work, learned each other slowly, and fell in love deeply enough to hold both the bright days and the shadowed ones. In Rita, he found more than a companion. He found a spirit that fit his own, someone who understood the fears he seldom named, the regrets he carried quietly, and the soft griefs that never asked for attention yet never quite faded. They married in 1988, not long after the turbulence of divorce, and over the years their bond was tempered by storms and strengthened by ordinary devotion, so that to the public, they often looked like a rare balance, hands entwined at premieres, smiles exchanged at events, children raised in a home that seemed to carry ease even when work was hard. Yet even the strongest bond can be tried by fate. In 2015, Rita received a diagnosis of breast cancer that shook the ground under both of them and cracked the illusion that anything in their world was unbreakable. The woman around whom Tom had built his life, his anchor and closest friend, suddenly had to fight for her own, undergoing a double mastectomy with reconstructive surgery, a series of medical steps that demanded courage by the hour and recovery that moved far more slowly than hope. For the first time in decades, Tom could not shield her from what hurt, and scripts, fame, and fortune all fell silent before a single task that truly mattered. He held her hand through appointments, whispered strength when her body faltered, and wept in private because the fear of losing the person who had made him whole felt larger than any stage could hold. He later shared, in measured words, that she had saved his life more times than he could count, and that the least he could do was remain by her side and pray he would not have to face a world without her. For that year, time itself seemed to slow as Hollywood receded and home turned into a battleground fought with medicine, faith, and love rather than with speeches and awards. They won that chapter and Rita survived, but scars remained in ways both seen and unseen, and with the scars came a quiet vigilance that tucked fear behind brave smiles, because once you have been shaken like that, you never again mistake calm for certainty. Tom himself had managed type 2 diabetes since 2013 with quiet discipline, and that single fact turned the threat of any future illness into a sharper edge of risk. They had one in 2015, but 5 years later a different storm arrived with the same demand for courage. In 2020, as the world slid into uncertainty, Tom and Rita were among the first public figures to test positive for COVID-19 while he was filming in Australia. The illness struck Rita hard as taste and smell fell away, exhaustion settled deep, and fever held on far longer than anyone wanted. For Tom, living with type 2 diabetes at age 63, the diagnosis felt like a life-threatening risk rather than a passing scare, and suddenly the man so often asked to play resilience became a face of vulnerability in a crisis that belonged to everyone. Headlines and statistics turned into a drumbeat that sounded like a countdown, and he was haunted not by rumor but by the image of leaving Rita behind, or of watching her watch him fade. During long nights far from home, he drafted quiet letters of farewell, not in panic but in sober preparation, just in case the unknown asked for more than courage. Once again they leaned on each other, and in an isolated hospital room their world shrank to for sterile walls and the presence that had always steadied them. Tom stayed strong not because fear was absent, but because Rita needed him to be. He kept a journal, sent messages of hope to those who worried, and found small ways to coax a smile when she could barely sit up. The illness did what hardship often does for the faithful. It bound them closer with the knowledge that no fame can shield a heart from mortality. And when recovery came, it brought gratitude along with change, because he felt different in lasting ways. His body, already tasked by years of diabetes, did not spring back as it once had. Simple walks left him winded, joints ached, and fatigue lingered beyond the calendar. Still, he set a brave face in public and kept the old charm for others while carrying new private questions about work, about becoming a burden, about whether a man who had played heroes would now need a steady hand on the stays. Even so, they emerged together, tired, shaken, and more deeply connected than before. And in a moment of rare openness, he said that when two people walk through fire together, there is very little left to fear, because closeness forged by trial breathes with a single heart. Their love was never a scripted fantasy. It was messy where life is messy, tested where life is harsh, and refined by years of pain endured side by side, which is why it endured when lesser bonds would have let go. Through breast cancer, through COVID, through chronic illness, through loss and fame and uncertainty, Tom and Rita held on not because it was easy, but because they understood exactly what it means to lose everything. And that knowledge sharpened the devotion rather than dulling it. Behind red carpet smiles, acceptance speeches, and viral moments of kindness stood a man who had nearly lost all that mattered, and a woman who refused to leave his side through the worst storms. Their story was never about perfection, but about resilience, not merely a love story, but a survival story told in whispers of care. In the end, what steadied Tom Hanks was not just talent or timing, but love, hard-won, unglamorous, relentless love that shows up when nothing else is certain. As he moves further into his late 60s, the battles do not ease, because diabetes persists and time keeps its own pace. Yet in each tremor of the hand and every careful step onto a stage, there is a quiet triumph, the proof of a man still here, still loving, still fighting, not only for himself, but for the woman who once held his hand through fire. No longer merely a Hollywood couple, they are two souls who refuse to let go, proving that in a world dazzled by youth, glamour, and polish, the most powerful love stories are written in scars. Perhaps that is why their bond feels timeless to those who have watched them endure. Yet the hardest test of Tom Hanks did not arrive on a set or a stage, but the day a father realized his son was slipping beyond his reach. To the world, he was the emblem of dignity, humility, and warmth, the man many called America's dad, but no admiration can soften the sight of a child losing his footing. Born into opportunity, Chad stepped onto a path that drifted away from the legacy his parents had built on compassion, decency, and perseverance, and that road soon filled with rebellion, serious substance abuse, and public controversy that turned private worry into public ache. For Tom, who had spent a lifetime trying to break free from the chaos of his own childhood, watching his son's struggle felt like history knocking at the door he had vowed to keep shut. In 2015, he supported Chet quietly through rehab, grasping for any rope that might hold. But recovery is a road, not a switch, and the headlines did not stop. Angry outbursts, polarizing social media posts, and a lawsuit tied to a 2015 car accident involving a vehicle registered to Tom and Rita, with reports that Chad asked the other driver not to call the police, raising suspicions of impairment and dragging Tom and Rita into a legal tangle they did not cause. For Tom, these were not scandals to consume but wounds to endure. After decades of avoiding controversy and standing for integrity in a business that often rewards the opposite, his son's name now lived beside words like lawsuit, addiction, and ridicule. It turned his pain from reputational to spiritual, as Chad later called himself the family's black sheep, a label Tom never used but perhaps quietly feared. And the questions that haunt any devoted parent would not let him rest. Had success blinded him to his son's suffering? Had the legacy he built become a pressure where comfort should have been? Still, he did not turn away. He did not disown. He did not rage or deny. He stayed quiet and present, because that is how love stands when it hurts. In late-night rooms where the phone feels heavier than the hand that holds it and the air colder than any spotlight, friends would say he wrestled with guilt and helplessness no shelf of trophies could numb. Perhaps he recognized echoes of his own past, the instability, the loneliness, the long ache for belonging that fame cannot grant. In time, Chad has claimed sobriety and spoken about the strain of growing up under the shadow of fame. Those scars remain. For Tom, they confirm a hard truth many parents know by heart. Love cannot always save your child, but it must never stop trying. This was no role with lines to memorize or marks to hit. It was life unscripted, where the stakes were not career-defining but soul-defining. And while audiences kept a hero on their screens, behind the scenes stood a father who was heartbroken, hopeful, and holding on. Even in the late glow of an extraordinary career, Tom Hanks carries the quiet echo of hurts fame can never erase. Beyond childhood fractures, public family rifts, and a life-threatening health scare, he still meets each day with burdens too intimate to trend, hidden behind a practiced calm that looks like resilience to the outside world. As he moves through his late 60s and beyond, time itself adds weight to every step, while the daily work of living with type 2 diabetes grows more exacting. Stricter routines, tighter discipline, slower recoveries. Diagnosed in 2013, this chronic condition demands constant checks and carries the anxious knowledge that a single careless choice can unsettle everything. It is a cool irony that the man who once reshaped his body for Castaway in Philadelphia now wages an unseen fight cameras will never capture. Age makes each battle heavier, while the public sees only a charismatic elder statesman, never the needles, the measured plates, the fatigue of managing a disease without a finish line, nor the small victories won when muscles tire faster and energy takes longer to return. Shadows of isolation also linger, because respect can be a lonely crown. At the height of success, he admitted to feeling adrift, surrounded by people yet anchored by no one, returning to hotel rooms after ovations, asking in the stillness what remains when the applause fades. Devastation comes not with spectacle, but with whispers that thin the soul more with age. Perfectionism, the very trait that lifted him, can also grind him down. He has spoken of self-doubt that prods every line, of second-guessing missed beats or misread moments, and of a fear more stubborn than any review. The fear of not being enough now, of being cherished for yesterday while today slips from his grasp as stamina must be guarded more carefully, lingers in Tom Hanks's life. Perhaps the sharpest ache does not come from his own body, but from the shadow of repetition he once tried to outrun. Despite his efforts to give his children steadiness and love, he has watched old fears take shape. Colin building a worthy career yet often measured against a father's silhouette, and Chad struggling with addiction and erratic public behavior. He has carried the guilt of being unable to shield them fully, especially from the shards of himself he fought to mend, worrying they might feel as splintered as he once did. His kindness, the very virtue the world celebrates, rises from those wounds because he knows what it is to feel unseen and left behind. And so he gives time, resources, and attention to strangers and causes. Yet even generosity can exact a quiet toll, for a man who keeps giving may forget to keep a space where his own healing can breathe as years ask for gentler pacing. Tom Hanks, the smiling landmark of countless cherished films, continues to shoulder battles that are not explosive or scandalous, but subtle, slow, and deeply human. He moves through them with grace, asking for no pity and seldom showing the weight. Yet, if one looks past the applause and carpets, they will see a life shaped not only by triumphs, but by private losses born with steady courage as age and illness press harder. This, too, is Tom Hanks's story, and perhaps the truest part of all. The man who carried so many stories now keeps one simple truth for himself, that peace is not a prize, but a practice on it every day. At 69, he keeps his center in a serene, sun-drenched villa in Pacific Palisades, Los Angeles, a 14,000-square-foot refuge reportedly acquired for $26 million, with thoughtful lines of limestone and towering glass opening to a resort-style pool deck where calm is not consumed but savored. His sanctuary extends across the sea as well, to a 450-square-meter stone retreat on the Greek island of Antiparos, where time slows under olive shade and a salt breeze carries stories of survival. Each summer, he and Rita Wilson return to this haven to reconnect with simplicity, nature, and one another. Their marriage, among the most enduring in Hollywood, is a cornerstone of his present life, a bond carved not by convenience but by storms endured, illness faced, and devotion that does not blink, with Rita, who survived breast cancer and COVID-19, serving as co-pilot, muse, and mirror. As a father, he remains closely present for Colin, Elizabeth, Chet, and Truman, watching not as a judge, but as a compass. He is proud of Colin's steadycraft, respectful of Elizabeth's privacy, mindful of the very public paths of Chet and Truman, and quietly hopeful as a more mature and sober Chet works to keep moving forward. Financially, Hank stands among Hollywood's wealthiest, with an estimated net worth of roughly $400 million. His transformative share from Forrest Gump reportedly surpassed $70 million, but that figure is only one chapter in a larger story of disciplined investing across historic mansions, coastal retreats, and even a nostalgic Bay Area houseboat that once sheltered him in youth, wealth treated as a tool rather than a trophy. Philanthropy remains central, from support for cancer research and homelessness relief to arts education, where he and Rita give to hospitals, schools, and organizations dedicated to dignity and opportunity. His help arrives not as spectacle, but as presence, quiet, consistent, and humble. His public stance has shifted too. He no longer chases roles or court attention, choosing instead projects with emotional or cultural weight like a man called Otto or his continued collaborations with Steven Spielberg, while also becoming a welcome voice on podcasts and a reflective writer of essays and short stories about history, character, and humanity. Perhaps the clearest signature of his life now is the calm it carries, not the absence of pain, but the presence of perspective. He walks with measured steps, jokes with fans, takes long strolls beside Rita, and still drives himself through Los Angeles traffic in an eclectic mix of vintage and electric cars. There are no grand proclamations or ornate displays, only a man who has learned deliberately and gratefully what endures, who understands that his current peace is not a reward for fame, but a choice made after decades of noise. In that choice may live the most meaningful story he has ever told. Not one written in scripts or framed on a screen, but one lived moment by tender moment with grace. What endures most about Tom Hanks is not a shelf of trophies, but a steady way of being that dignifies everyone within his reach. He treats kindness as a discipline and decency as daily work, proving that character can be deliberate, repeatable, and reliable even when no one is watching. He shows that integrity may remain quiet and still reshape a room, because listening with full attention often carries more power than speaking with greater volume. His influence is measured not only in iconic roles, but in the calmer hearts and better days of the people who have worked beside him and the audiences who have leaned on his stories. He has walked through pain without turning it into spectacle, and he has carried triumph without mistaking applause for purpose, holding both with humility that steadies others. He reminds us that greatness is less a moment than a habit, less a headline than a choice renewed each morning to do the next right thing. His generosity arrives without trumpets because the point is not attention but impact, and his work is to leave people safer, seen, and more possible than before. He has turned empathy into a craft, patience into a promise, and responsibility into a form of grace that does not expire when the cameras go dark.